Yeah, you do one of those. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. It's 1:01 and we're starting the Deal Doctor Live session. Thanks for joining us. Today, I have Tracy Johnson, a member of our broker support team, joining us. Eric may join us if he has a good signal from his location, and if he doesn't, he won't. So we're gonna talk a little bit today about disclosures. The word disclosure in real estate is a word that is very often misunderstood. We're going to try to clear it up a little bit here. So let's talk about the very first disclosure that you have to provide when you meet a client. What would that be? Tracy, this one's on you. What's the very first thing that you have to disclose?
Your position in the relationship. So you're going to need to fill out the disclosure regarding agency relationship, which seeds your relationship with your potential buyer or seller. Usually it's the buyer when we need to introduce this in the beginning.
Yeah. So let's say that I'm holding an open house and a buyer walks in the door and it's my listing, but they don't like that one, but they say, hey, listen, we're looking for a house very much like this. We have so much to spend. We have this, we've been pre-qualified. We're selling our other house. When were we supposed to disclose the nature of our relationship to them as a potential buyer?
Yeah, before they told us a bunch of personal things about themselves.
Exactly.
Mean, I don't even want to know the name of your dog, okay?
Thankfully, the name of their dog is usually the last thing we find out. But anyway, but you're absolutely right. The law requires that we disclose our position to them. What is our relationship to them before they share a bunch of confidential information? What's the reality in the world? What happens in reality with agents? Because I see the dates on those sellers or those disclosures regarding agency relationships. So I know that agents aren't filling them out until they sit down to write a purchase agreement. Is that right?
Right, because they're thinking of the buyer's agent, the disclosure regarding agency relationship and a buyer's agency contract as the same thing, when in fact they are really two entirely different documents. The buyer's agency contract can be signed at a later date, but when we first meet them, when we first have that first introduction, we just want to say, hey, right now I'm disclosing that in this relationship between the two of us, I am acting as a buyer's agency. I'm not saying how long we're going to be in a relationship with each other in this capacity. At some time at a later date, I will introduce that form, and I will usually tell them that as well. Hi, I'm Tracy. This is a form that just says I'm a buyer's agent. It says what my responsibilities are to you and my duties as a buyer's agent. At some point, we'll introduce this other form that defines the terms of that agreement.
So going back to the open house, I'm standing there and a buyer walks in and starts to share just confidential information comes out of their mouth. And I'm working for the seller. I'm not going to be working for them. Let's just say that. But I'm standing there, and what do? I have to kind of stop them and say, I appreciate you sharing information, but before you share any more information, let me be clear that I am working for the seller. And
Right.
so if you would be so kind to share this document that says I'm working for the seller, disclosure of agency relationship, and you provide that to them, what's the likelihood that they're going to sign it?
Pretty low.
Pretty low.
Yeah,
and,
pretty low.
I mean, that's the reality. The law wasn't written like for the real life of realtors. Mm-hmm. But it's a law that we have to abide by nevertheless. Mm-hmm. So when you encounter those situations where you have to disclose to a buyer that you're working for your seller, how do we protect ourselves to make sure that we don't get called on the carpet later because we didn't tell them early enough that we were working for the seller? Is there a way that we can protect ourselves to make sure that they understand, that a potential buyer understands that we're working for the seller?
Yeah. Are you basically just saying you could email them if they refuse to sign it? You could follow up with hey, it was really nice to meet you. You know, as a reminder, when you walked up to the front door, you might have seen my sign outside the front yard. I do have a relationship with the seller. but I'm here if you have any questions or if there's another property, etc.
Yeah. Okay. So again, I'm going to go back to the open house because I love this example of being, I really like open houses. Can't you tell?
Yeah, I can tell.
I did one yesterday though.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, buyer walks in the door and they say, well, we want to be represented by you.
Mhm.
As well as, the seller already has you as their representative. How's that going to work out? How are we treading on some real thin ice there?
Mhm. Well, at the end of the day, what we want them to understand is we can put pen to paper on their behalf, but we need to have them understand that our loyalty and our trust began with the person we started with. So in this case, I would say to the buyer, I can absolutely write an offer for you because there are two tests to that other agency called dual agency that needs to be there. And one needs to be a seller's agency contract and a buyer's agency contract. So in this case, you can't have that buyer's agency contract. They just walked through the front door of your listing. So in that case, you're going to let them know you could absolutely represent them, but you would be not being loyal to your seller. So therefore, you would stay in the seller's position. And if you're unlike, a lot of buyers, you know the neighborhood, maybe you know this house, maybe you've been watching for it, maybe you know what you'd like to write. If that's the case, I could absolutely write an offer on your behalf, but I would not be able to offer any advice on that offer.
So, in the vernacular of the trade, we as listing agents can still get double dips. We can still get both sides of the commission as long as we stay in the seller's position. Now, I had a call last week from one of our agents, and this agent said, well, I have a buyer under contract. I've been showing houses for months. I mean, many houses, and I just have a listing coming up that is perfect for them, and they want to buy it, and I will have the seller under contract. Now, what do I do? Well, that is one of those rare situations where you may legitimately find yourself in the need to go into dual agency. But there's a process. First of all, you have to have that equality, both of them under contract, both of them that you have described as your position as a buyer's agent, and on the other hand, as a seller's agent. And then what's the next step before anything else? You have to get their permission, right, to go into dual agency.
Yep.
Once you get their permission, then there are 3 more forms that have to be filled out, aren't there?
Yes.
And what are those?
Well, the good news is we're in the process of right now updating dot loop. So all of our agents are going to find under this new dot loop organized folder system, it's going to be much easier to find some of these things, but they need to have a new disclosure regarding agency relationship that says, hey, I have a new position here and I want to let everyone in the transaction know, both on the buy side and the sell side. So they're going to need those. They're going to need the dual agency form that actually discloses, hey, everybody, this is now a dual agency.
Right.
And both parties will have to sign that.
Yeah, and both parties have to agree to it before you can go. It's not up to the agent to make that decision. You have to put it out for both parties. So I think that covers the disclosure regarding agency relationships form.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you a question though, because I like how you get to fire all the questions at me. So so here's one for you.
Call it the Deal Doctor live stream, okay?
Yeah, okay, all right. So I'm thinking of going back to your open house that you so nicely used as an example. We're going back to your open house from yesterday. Did you show up at your open house yesterday? And one of the things that you would have had in hand would have been the disclosure regarding agency relationship. Because if you had more than one buyer walk through that door, you would have wanted to have those in hand. And I wonder, number one, if you had them, and number two, how many of our agents don't know that they should have those in hand when they're at their open house?
I would guess that there are a lot of them, but fortunately, yes, I had one sitting on the countertop on the kitchen island as people walk in. I didn't make an issue of it, but there it was. If they had started to say to me, oh, by the way, I'm pre-qualified and I want to buy this and I have, $40,000 to put down, whatever it was. If that conversation had started, I would have been able to say, I just, real quick, I am working for the seller, so any information you share with me, I have the duty to share with my seller. Do you understand that? And they would have probably said, no, okay, got it. But I also had the multiple listing form filled out and the brochure and also seller, all that. Yeah, I go with a whole bunch of, I even had the little box with the booties, and it was
Beautiful. I love it.
anyway. Let's talk about what happens if it's a family member or yourself. What happens in the whole disclosure agency thing when you are representing either yourself or a family member, and what are the limitations of that family member thing?
Yeah, so it should be an immediate family member, a brother, a sister, a mother, a father, something like that. And it never hurts to over disclose. If I was writing for a cousin of mine, guess what? It's not required, but it would be advised to show that you have love and affection for the person that you're writing on behalf of. So always disclose your position when you're writing as a buyer's agent. There's usually a provision, we've got, Battle Creek purchase agreements. We've got, Northern Michigan, the MOM board. We've got boards from Cadillac, you name it. They're all a little bit different, but there's usually a place for other conditions or something like that. And you should write in there what your agency position is. Number one, a buyer's agent, but if you have love and affection for the person you're writing on behalf of, it's a law.
And so we as agents can put in their buyer or seller is a agent, state of Michigan, licensed in the state of Michigan. Doesn't really have to say that we are selling it or selling it for the purpose of profit. That's unnecessary.
Yeah,
I know
for disclosure when you're representing yourself. I didn't answer that part of the question, but yes. Yeah, agent is a licensed agent in the state of Michigan or something to that degree.
Yeah. Okay, so sometimes we find ourselves, obviously, with a self-sale. When we are ourselves, we can only represent ourselves. We can't be a transaction coordinator. We can't be a dual agent, right? Mm-hmm. Because what judge in the world? I often use the litmus test of what judge in the world? What judge in the world is going to believe that you represented both parties equally if you have an investment in that property? The same holds true if it's your parent or your sibling, or, as you say, someone you have love and affection for. Mm-hmm. So let's extend the love and affection or just business relationship with a contractor or a landlord that you work as a property manager for over a number of years, or you sell their new construction packages. What's the likelihood that we can be a dual agent or transaction coordinator in those situations?
Yeah, not real likely. I mean, you could do it, but you would open yourself up and your broker to tons of liability. So we recommend that you learn these kinds of things on the front end so that when the opportunity presents itself, and it will eventually, where you have a friend, where you have a family member, where you want to write a purchase agreement for, or sell their home. Let's say it's a listing. Where should that be? It should be in the listing contract, but most importantly, it should be advertised to the public that this listing agent is, representing a family member, or it's owned by the family, owned by the agent. It's agent owned.
So, all right, let's move on to the affiliated business arrangement disclosure.
Okay.
That's a fun one. Because obviously we have that in place for our title insurance product, Star Title, that we are affiliated with. And if an agent is going to use Star Title or have their clients using Star Title for either a sale or purchase, we have to have that affiliated business arrangement disclosure signed by the client, right?
Yep, either on the buy side or the sell side.
Yeah. Now, is that a contract that they have to use Star Title?
It is not. It's simply a disclosure that says in the event you use Star Title or another affiliated business, you may have written in there a home warranty company, something like that. No matter what it is that you have the potential to have an affiliated relationship with this buyer or seller should be what's disclosed in a disclosure. It doesn't say you have to use them. It says in the event that we do.
So let's say that the buyer gets this and says, well, I don't want to sign it. I don't want to sign this. I don't feel comfortable. I feel as though it's a contract. I feel as if you're telling me I have to use Star Title. Can we force that buyer or seller, either of those, can we force them to sign that affiliated business arrangement disclosure? I have to keep looking at it because it's such a tongue twister, but anyway, so can we force them to sign it?
No, you can take their arm and twist it as far as you can behind your back, but we are powerless in trying to make people sign these things. We do what we can. And if you're an agent, we've gotten calls before from people who just sometimes, you have to love it when it's a client who's an attorney. We'll often get those calls. In that case, I put a little spill box at the top of my form. It's in my loop. It's prepared. It even has the client's signature box on it. And I might put a note in there as big of a font as I can use, spill it with color that says, hey, everybody, client refuses to sign this. Let us know. We'll go in the back end and get that form approved for you, because we realize that, not everyone is going to be agreeable to this. It's a very small amount of people who refuse to sign it. But in that event, we have done what we can to show that we tried to give proper disclosure, but the client refused.
And we can't force them to sign it, but if you run into that situation, cover yourself. Cover 5-star, that it's not going to come back that you have no proof that you shared this information or sent it via email or something. Let's talk about the seller's disclosure of condition. Oh, wait a minute. No, before we leave affiliated, let's pretend that they get their title insurance through Star, and they get a fire and hazard premium through Big Lake and a mortgage through Big Lake, and they get a home warranty through American Home Shield, for example. Let's see, what else can we think of? But all of those, don't all of those have to be on the affiliated business?
They should, they should be listed, especially because a lot of times home warranties are outside of the boilerplate one that we have put together, but there is a space there for you to fill and add any additional things. Maybe, we've got a few agents who are also mortgage not brokers, they have their mortgage license. So that's something you should disclose as well, your position in that.
Anytime we get any sort of compensation or favor from a title company, even if it's sending out your postcards, or American Home Shield gives, I think, a $50 or $75 spiff. I get it. It's supposed to come through 5-star because it's compensation to an agent. And I will tell you that I know that American Home Shield says that's not a referral fee. Well, guess what? If it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck.
Yeah, and it's a little bit gray, so don't live in the gray. Right. Sometimes those things get introduced much later in the transaction too. Maybe it's after you've inspected. Sometimes, those things will get introduced. So there's always an opportunity to go back and redo it. If you didn't do an affiliated business and list it in the beginning, you could have an opportunity to do it later just to protect yourself.
Absolutely. It's always better to have it there than to not have it there. Material fact. Seller comes and says, I want you to list my house, and my basement floods every third Tuesday, but I don't want you to tell anyone.
Run.
Run.
Run, Forrest, run.
Run. Yeah, run is definitely probably the best answer. But can we choose to not display or disclose that information if we know there is a material fact, that there's evidence of a problem, whether it's a leaking roof, faulty basement, mold, bad furnace? Do we have any latitude whatsoever there?
We have none. If they've told it to us, we need to encourage them to disclose it, not only for our benefit, but for their benefit. Because nobody wants somebody coming back to say, hey, it's Tuesday and you said it only floods on Wednesdays. You want to disclose that, use as few words as possible, right? But describe the fact that it happens on an infrequent basis, maybe list 3 times in the last 5 years, whatever it might be, but give some detail that lends itself to the understanding that we have had water in our basement, and make sure that that gets into that seller's disclosure.
Now I'm going to flip it on in the other direction. We actually have a situation going on right now where an agent is concerned about a home buyer bought their house through this agent about a year ago. And since they moved in, one of the homeowners, the wife, is sick. And she believes, the buyer believes, that the home is contributing to her illness. And the question is, do we disclose that on the seller's disclosure form?
Yeah, I got this call, and I know you did too. So go ahead, I'm listening.
And the question I asked the agent is there any scientific evidence which links the illness to something which we don't know what it would be in the home? Is there asbestos in the home, or radon, or mold, or I actually had a doctor I sold a house to once, and when she moved in, she became very sick and found out that there was formaldehyde in the beams. It was an old prairie farmhouse in the 1800s, built in the 1800s, and that she was allergic to formaldehyde, and she got very sick. We had to sell the house. So, but we've discovered that there was actually a link there.
Mm-hmm.
In this particular case, we have no scientific evidence that the house is linked to her illness, or to the symptoms that she's having. So in that particular case, until we know that there is actually a link, a scientific link between the two, they don't have to disclose it, in my opinion. And that's where we're headed with this thing, because they don't, there's no way to prove that her illness is in fact linked to the house and not just her.
Coincidental, right?
Yeah. So on the other hand, if they do find that her illness is linked, then they have to fill out a new seller's disclosure form. What else do we got? Material fact, we covered that. Seller's disclosure. Who's actually disclosing with the seller's disclosure of condition form? What we know is the seller's disclosure.
Yeah, the seller's disclosure is truly the seller's disclosure. It is their opportunity to disclose anything known about the property that they consider a defect or a aha moment, anything that might come to mind. And, you know, we're really not supposed to take pen to paper in any part of that seller's disclosure statement. One could even argue that even the property address at the top of the seller's disclosure should be penned or typed in dot loop by the seller themselves.
Yeah, I actually was named in a lawsuit years ago, about 25 years ago. I was named in a lawsuit, and the only thing that I put on there in my handwriting was the address at the top. That cost me $2,500, that little address. So
ouch.
I
can see it written on your forehead right there, Don.
$2,500 on that one. So if you don't want that to happen, let the seller fill it out. Let them do it. Okay. Last item up for bids. Let's talk about the lead-based paint disclosure. This is one of my favorites, because if it was built in 78 or later, right? I always get that language confused, but anyway, 78 or later. If it was built 78 or later, do they have to fill out that little box at the top?
They do not. Oh, well, box, there's, yeah, it just.
The little box at the top that said it was built at 78 or later. Do they even have to fill that out? The answer is no. There are a lot of agents who think that they have to fill that out, and that's not the law. Now, I will also say that sometimes other brokers require it for their records, and so their poor agents aren't getting paid if they don't have the little box at the top filled out. And so sometimes it's just easier to help out another agent and get it done, but it's not required according to law. So that's all I had on disclosure today. How about you? Anything else, Tracy?
Yeah, I think that about covers it. Thinking about lead-based paint, the only thing I would say about lead-based paint and we've talked about this before, it's that federal pamphlet. On the listing side, you should almost be sending it over as well to make sure that the buyer, when you have that house that was built before 1978, that you should send that over to make sure that you've disclosed and covered your seller. And when you're on the buy side and you've checked that box that talks about disclosure, it's there. It's in dot loop. I usually add a set of a little set of initials at the top of that disclosure. I send it to my buyer to make sure I've covered the buyer as well. And dot loop has that little button that says history, those 3 little dots on the far right. No one can ever question whether my buyer got that federal pamphlet, because
Absolutely.
I've shared it. I've had them initial and acknowledge. I usually share it with a statement that says something like this: hey, the home you're buying was built before 1978. There are lots of homes in the US that have the possibility where lead paint could be possible. If you would like some really good sleeping material tonight, I highly recommend you open this document before you go to bed. But nonetheless, I've given it.
And I would agree with that assessment. So yeah, it's simple enough to put a quick initial box or signature box in there with dot loop. It makes it really easy. It shows up as a PDF form.
Yep.
It's then their responsibility to read it, and we know that they, a lot of them. So anyway, I think
I'm going to ask you a quick question about this. So Don, you've been in this business for 40 plus years.
Oh, thanks a lot. 35.
Okay. How many times have you had a buyer do a lead-based paint inspection? I've had 0.
0. I've never had one. Yeah.
Okay.
So
yeah, I usually tell buyers, I don't even have an inspector that does one, but I know that you can go to Home Depot, get a little kit. It's a little sponge, I think, that you rub on the paint. It turns purple, I think, if the presence of lead is there. But just wondered out of curiosity.
yeah, I've this will be my 36th year, and no, I've never had, and probably as close as I can gather, about 1,000 transactions, and no, I've never had one. So
good to know. Good to know.
Hey, thanks everyone for joining us, and we will see you next week.
All right, great. Thanks, Don. Bye, everybody.
Bye.